Change is constant. Its quickened pace defines our time. Technology continues its frenetic advance, while the world's population grows by more than 200,000 people every day. The global economic machine has increased the capacity to generate wealth, but while globalization has improved the lives of most, it is clear that many have been left behind. Challenging questions are emerging which demand answers. What could a more equitable economic model look like? How can we decouple growth from the negative impacts of human activity? Will supply always meet demand? Climate change, perhaps the most serious and urgent challenge facing all life on our planet, underscores a pressing need for swifter action. The consequences of further global warming cannot be overstated. When will renewable energy power the world? What can be done to protect the world's coastal populations from rising sea levels? How will we feed an additional 2 billion citizens by 2050? New technology will continue to drive innovation, unlocking potential solutions to a host of global challenges, from energy production and storage to mobility and healthcare. Powerful drivers are shaping our collective future. It is critical in these fast-moving times to stop and think about the future we're each creating every day through our actions or inaction. What future are you shaping?
Hoş geldiniz sayın katılımcılar. Etkinliğimizde
I'd like to welcome you all. In this online activity, we have simultaneous interpretation. You're going to see the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. So if you choose the right language for your listening, you're going to be able to listen to it to the conference in your own language. This conference is going to be focusing on the role of the smart cities with respect to the smart cities role and their projects in sustainability and resilience, where we're going to have the chance to listen to Professor Jason Pomeroy. And Arup is a consultancy company that's providing services in various disciplines in more than 140 countries in the world. And the founder of Pomeroy Studio and Pomeroy Academy, Professor James Pomeroy, is an awarded academician and a writer, and he is going to join us today. In the first session of today, we're going to listen to his speech about culture, innovation, and the smart cities. And in the second part of our conference, together with our panelists, we're going to discuss the sustainability and the role of the smart cities in terms of sustainability and resilience. And again, I have to remind you that our conference is going to be recorded, and we would appreciate if you can write down your questions on the chat box on your screens. And I'd like to welcome you once again. Thank you very much for joining. The floor is yours, sir. Jason.
Thank you very much, or should I say teşekkürler, and nasılsın merhaba to everybody on this call. It's a pleasure to be here. As Hakan rightly pointed out, my name is Professor Jason Pomeroy. I'm the founding principal of Pomeroy Studio and Pomeroy Academy. We are designers and thought leaders of sustainable design, sustainable built environments. We're designed from the macro scale of cities to the micro scale of carbon negative development. And it gives me pleasure to share some insights today relating to culture, innovation, and the smart district. Now, oceans cover 71% of the Earth's surface. Deserts take up slightly over 10%, and cities only cover 3% of our planet. And yet, cities effectively provide a home for 50% of the global population, which is to increase to 75% by 2050. Needless to say, what we see in many a global city is overcrowding, waste pollution, traffic congestion. And if we want to continue enjoying life in cities and not live in gridlocked urban slums, then cities have to become more efficient, more sustainable. Cities have to become smarter. But what is a smart city? I've had the privilege of being both an academic, an architect, and a TV presenter where I research the subject matter of what a smart city is. You're all too familiar with the whole idea of the smart definition, whether it's relating to computers and the use of big data, or whether we're talking about people's intellectual capacity. But we also need to bear in mind that the city part of a smart city is cast in bricks and mortar, or it has been until recently. The traditional cities that you see, like in Rome, were all about the open spaces, the street and the square being those opportunities for social interaction. The space became more important than the object. But by the time we get to the modern city, the object became more important than the space. All of a sudden, the glass, the brick, the steel, all of the physical components that come together to create these buildings, these objects, became more important than the open space. Today, though, here we are in this Zoom call. It's the virtual space that's actually making a difference. And in this pandemic-stricken time, it is the virtual space that allows us to connect. So we can see how digitalization, big data, and modern methods of communication is aiding the growth of our cities, both physically and virtually. When I was doing my TV show, I would often go around asking people, what does a smart city mean to you? Lots of people would say bicycle sharing schemes, talking fridges, driverless cars, surveillance. And ultimately, my journey through different cities around the world was a quest to find out what a smart city means to different people. Because what I found is what a smart city means in Asia is very different to what a smart city means in Europe. The culture of a place, the people, the physical elements of the city, the technologies, they all play an active role in helping enhancing the people's lives within a city. There have been many different definitions of a smart city. Batty in 2012 was highlighting that a smart city is one in which ICT, or information communication technology, is merged with traditional infrastructures, coordinated and integrated using new digital technologies. Urban performance depends not only on a city's endowment of hard infrastructure, but also, and increasingly so, on the availability and quality of knowledge, communication, and social infrastructure. That's according to Carolew. And according to Peak and Stam, knowledge and innovation can act as an economic stimulus to the broader city in order to grow a new base of jobs, adjust to industrial change, or leverage technology to address sustainability, resilience, and social cohesion. So I want to take you on three different case studies. Three case studies that also talk about three generations of a smart city that shows, I guess, an evolution of the way that we both perceive the smart city and how they can enhance our lives. The first generation is Songdo. Songdo was built 12 kilometers from Incheon International Airport in Korea. And the Songdo International Business District occupies approximately 6 kilometers of this new built city. Ultimately, I like to call it the instant noodle city because it was almost like you could add water and then within 3 minutes you got a meal. Songdo was built from scratch in a remarkable period of time. It was part of the Incheon Free Economic Zone, Songdo being a center for international business, high-tech industry, and Cheongna being a center for finance and leisure, and Yeongjong being a center for logistics and tourism. all of which came together as a free economic zone driven through government incentives to encourage investors to come in. So what characterizes this smart city? I would say that one of the characteristics is the use of big data. Sensors are placed throughout the city that can collect extremely large data sets of information that can be computationally analyzed to reveal patterns, trends, and associations, especially relating to human behavior and interactions. And this included the trialing of motion tracking, where we can take vital information and statistics for missing people, for instance. But it does beg the question about our own personal information security. Surveillance was another big thing. The Incheon Operational Central Center is effectively a means to collect big data together through sensors that were deployed throughout the city. And those sensors collect real-time data capable of identifying and managing incidents, looking at malfunctioning infrastructure, waste, electricity, water, effectively a tool to monitor operations and productivity of the city. There were smart technologies put everywhere, whether it was car parking or even integrated into the comfort of your home. You've got to bear in mind, though, that many of the technologies that were being incorporated had a particular shelf life. By the time the buildings were created and delivered, some of the technologies became outdated. Waste management was another important factor relating to Songdo. This remarkable city had very far-reaching, recycling plans for its waste, for its water. There were effectively 54 to 55 kilometers worth of pipe network that saw the separation of waste into 7 collection points and recyclable points where the energy was generated by the compaction of the dry waste. There was also anaerobic digesters that were able to turn that biomass into energy. So the ability to look at waste and converting into energy that could then supply residences, apartments, and offices was another important move for this city. There was smart and remote learning, the ability to learn in the comfort of your home. But you've got to bear in mind that is it really worthwhile looking at a screen in your living room when you've got one of these, a smart device where you can FaceTime call? Another example of how sometimes the technology can become obsolete. So we do need to be bearing in mind the importance of designing with flexibility in place. Curiously enough, what Songdo became really known for was as a smart knowledge hub. Schools like the Chadwick International School, where coding and ICT feature very heavily in the curriculum, effectively creating the future generations of smart scientists. So what are the evolutionary observations of Songdo? I would say that this is a good example of a first-generation smart city, where the investment of private developer, technology corporation is supported by a strong government mandate to transform its national economy from a manufacturing base to a knowledge and low carbon based economy. And ultimately that has yielded this very technology focused smart city. And I would say that it's actually more of a government driven initiative. High on the agenda is the technology and the economy, and it's a very top-down approach from the government to ensure that this first-generation smart city can be delivered. Now, the second case study is arguably building upon the first generation. Bandung is in Indonesia. It's regarded as the Paris of West Java. And what I find fascinating is that it has all of the issues that you see in many a global city. population growth, traffic congestion. And what you find is that this city that had 100,000 people living in it in 1970 is projected to have 4.1 million people living there by 2030. And that puts considerable stress and strain on the city. Songdo had the money to be able to build a city from scratch, but Bandung didn't. And so Bandung had to get smart in a very unique way. One of the ways was through social enterprise and outreach to the community. Things like this, the startup community, hackathons and incubators as a civic-driven movement to host countless startup initiatives, ultimately led by young techno-entrepreneurs and evangelists and volunteers from civil society in order to create 1,000 startups in Bandung by the end of the year 2020. And ultimately, this was to improve the social economic condition and also the cultural condition of its citizens. We also see very clever use of big data. The Bandung Command Center is effectively a digital monitoring facility that collects big data in a variety of sectors in order to improve the city's operation and governance. Information is collected and relayed to the command center through a series of CCTV cameras and GPS devices installed on public vehicles. What we can see is a wonderful opportunity to see how different elements of information shared through social media could be sifted via algorithms in order for the municipality to solve issues in real time. Flooding, congestion, pollution, crime, these pertinent issues that are being voiced by the people were then able to be addressed by the municipality. And it was an opportunity for the people to think, people are listening to what I'm having to say. I feel that I have contributed to shaping my city. This also led to a huge citizen movement to try and enhance mobility in the city. Social media apps like Cuneyt allowed it an opportunity for GPS to be used wisely. People could hop on and hop off these various small buses without having to rely on predetermined pickup points like your conventional buses. This helped keep people moving in the city. E-governance was an incredibly important thing. And as I showed in that previous slide of the mayor of Bandung in his time, he wanted to ensure that the platform of e-governance was a platform for the people. And ultimately, this online complaint service, if you will, provided a means of feedback so that the people had a voice. The mayor also reached out to the community in rather interesting ways through the built environment. The community engagement program, which looked at pairing one architect with one sub-district, allowed for various different community exercises and initiatives, whether it is building local village libraries or community centres, or holding public events to try and engage with civil society and share information, share knowledge, and hopefully boost productivity and prosperity. So this is a very different approach to a smart city that we see in Generation 2. While Bandung acknowledges the place of information communication technology in shaping the local economy, it also looks at moving the government-driven approach to one side and also kind of removing the private corporation to be more favourable to using citizen participation, a more community-driven engagement that seeks to employ the technology already in the hands of the people whether it's a 7-year-old child or the 70-year-old grandparent. And ultimately, this shows that whilst the first generation smart city of technology, economy, and the power of a government is important, so too is the voice of the people to ensure that their cultural identity and their place in society can actually help enhance and improve the quality of life in this second generation smart city. By the time we get to the third generation, we can look at Amsterdam as a classic example. Amsterdam is home to 1.1 million people, and I would like to think of it as the cool kid on the block. What I really love about Amsterdam as a smart city is that it has rather unique prospects when it comes to the circular economy. Let's take Amsterdam Arena as an example, the home to Ajax, the football team. Now, what I find remarkable here is that at the Amsterdam Arena, 148 used Nissan Leaf car batteries, 2 degraded for automotive use, are given a new lease of life. They have the capacity still for energy storage, and they act as a stable power supply for the stadium. So the 4,200 solar panels that generates effectively 2.8 megawatt hours of energy effectively get stored in these batteries and then can be provided back to the stadium and the surrounding community. I also love the quirkiness about Amsterdam, these innovation labs, and they encourage young entrepreneurs to come up with far-reaching ideas that may enhance the city. Not too different to seeing how these innovation labs like the Amsterdam Metropolitan Solutions Institute can actually be helping bring science, education, government and business together to try and foster new ideas that can enhance the community. There's a huge embrace of resilience planning. There's a huge understanding of how they can turn water from a negative aspect to a positive aspect. Polder deck roof gardens that can absorb excess rainwater, but can also be used as a tool to allow for urban greenery, reducing flood risk, but also providing an element of resilience and rooftop farming. When I think of mobility, it really does optimize not just road infrastructure, but also canal infrastructure. And the Amsterdam Metropolitan Solution Institute has worked with MIT to have these wonderful autonomous boats that could be used as a means of delivery, but also as a means of mobility. And when we think of Amsterdam, we cannot help but also think of how water is a remarkable source for urbanization. This scheme is Eiberg. It's effectively a disused dock and port that has been converted into a place to live, work, play, and learn, and ultimately provides an alternative means of urbanism in a constantly constrained and flood risk prone environment. So a very sustainable and a resilient approach to building back. What are the observations here? Well, ultimately, the third and final generation is that Amsterdam embraces ICT and big data in a positive way, but it augments citizen participation with the inclusion of academia, private corporations, and government in the fostering of city-specific innovations. Its ability to enable multiple stakeholders to use the city as a living laboratory has also allowed for a culture of innovation to flourish. So in conclusion, what we've seen is Songdo as a first-generation smart city, Bandung as a second-generation smart city, and Amsterdam as a third-generation smart city that ultimately brings the environment and space into the equation as well. And I would say that moving forward in the way that we are designing our smart cities for the future, it will be worthwhile engaging with 4 spheres of influence: If we are to truly create a culture of innovation, it does mean that it's not the design will of an individual, but multiple people, multiple stakeholders. That means the state, the corporation, civil society, and academia bringing their own value to the table. Corporations can champion proof of concepts. Academia can aid research and development. Civil society can define needs and aspirations, but the state can regulate and govern. These 4 spheres of influence and our views and recordings and research into smart cities is found in my recent book, Cities of Opportunities, Connecting Culture and Innovation. With that, I thank you very much, and we can move on to the next part of this exercise. Over to you, Hakan.
Çok teşekkürler Jason.
Thank you very much, Jason, for this wonderful presentation. Now, our next session is going to be under the moderation of Professor Jason Pomeroy, where we're going to be focusing on the role of the smart cities in terms of sustainability and resilience. Now, I would like to introduce our panelists. Léan Doody is going to be with us, Europe, our Arup Europe Integrated Cities and Planning Leader, Mr. Cuneyt Taskesen, the head of Bursa Metropolitan Municipality Department of Smart Urbanism and Innovation, and Ms. Ilgın Gökaşar, Director of Boğaziçi University ITS Lab, and Ms. Yelda Reis from UN Habitat Turkey as a local consultant, strategic advisor. Yes, Cuneyt Bey, the floor is yours. If you can switch on your camera, we would be happy. Yes, the floor is yours. Back to yours, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hakan. Teşekkürler. And can I just say thank you also for providing that introduction. To the audience here, I had incredible difficulty with pronunciation, and I would ask all the panelists to forgive me in my slightly awkward English accent in trying to pronounce your names as we move through. But I am absolutely delighted that we can actually be here on this call, and I'm delighted to be able to look at some of the urban challenges that we face through more resilient smart cities for tomorrow. Now, what we're going to do is this. We're going to be looking at a particular issue or a series of issues. We are living in challenging times. Climate change is an imminent threat to the future of our planet. Population increase, for instance, is causing unprecedented congestion in our cities. Migration has further exacerbated social inequalities. Culture has been eroded in the face of globalization. And whilst we have shifted from a technological to a digital age, we need to ask ourselves whether our quest for technological advancement is really enhancing our lives. Such environmental, spatial, cultural, social, economic, and technological issues manifest in the urban challenges that beset our smart cities of tomorrow. And they necessitate a new culture of innovation to bring about systemic change to deliver sustainable and resilient ideas and outcomes. So in this chat, I'm delighted to be able to speak with these panelists about discussing and looking at a broad range of issues relating to more resilient smart cities, with prompts for thinking about the nature of our societies, of our economies, of our environments, of our spaces, cultures, technologies. And hopefully we can have a few clues and cues to build back better in this region. Now, I'm going to be not asking questions, I'm going to be asking prompts for thinking. I'm not going to put any of you on the spot because that would be cheating. What I'd like to do is ask you to lean in to my prompts. You can raise your hand, I will see the hand. You can either wave at me or you can just lift that yellow hand and we will be able to hear from you. That's perfect, Ilgın, perfect, thank you. So first thing, let's start with the social element. We're living in a post-pandemic world. We can see that we need to ensure that the city is still a livable and lovable domain. So what are the key mechanisms to ensure that the city is a place for people to come together? I'm going to leave that open to all of you. Who wants to have a go at that?
May I speak?
Of course you can, Elgin. Of course you can.
Thank you, Jason. It was a very nice speech, by the way. Sunumun çok güzeldi. Ben Türkçe devam edeyim.
Let me proceed in Turkish. Well, it was a really inspiring presentation. In this presentation, we listened to different examples. And what I saw was that from a more primitive, basic kind of understanding, we are proceeding into a more advanced kind of understanding and tackling the issues. But this being advanced is to do with economic situation, economic conditions. That is what I think. But from Turkey point of view, I would like to ask this, elaborate on the social aspect. When we talk about smart cities, for instance, what we say is that, yes, big data is important and deriving concluding meaning on that big data and making cities smarter. Of course, these are all really nice concepts, as you have also mentioned, but when it comes to countries like Turkey or similar countries, the situation is that, yes, we, as a country, when we adopt technology, a certain type of technology, first of all, we get an example which has already been practiced, and we do not dwell on a really long-term plan for it, rather than being proactive, so as to say, we proceed reactively as a country. That is our problem. We've got a huge potential, our capital force, resources, renewable energy, we've got all these means. So what we have to do is to use these means and run long-term projects. With climate change, we had precipitation, high amount of precipitation, but we also had problems in our infrastructure to deal with it. And for instance, we use technology and users, Uber, for instance, problems. So all these actually shows us that we're not proactive, but we're reactive. Okay, so Uber is launched, let's use it. Something is launched, yes, let's do it. But that brought along problems because we're not proactively planning for it. Of course, we have to respond to certain issues immediately. But just like in the first example, from the very top, policies have to be defined, and then from the very top, we should be defining our purposes, our needs for the upcoming 5 years, 10 years time. Where do we want to be? What is our vision? What kind of a city, country would we like to see? This is, I mean, let's not think in large dimensions. This goes the same for a house as well. In your house, for instance, in your household, you make a plan, for instance, to buy a car, to buy a nice home. So first of all, you set up your plans, and based on your plans, you proceed. So with smart cities, especially in countries like Turkey, in order for them to be leading, first of all, they have to draft these plans as to where they want to be in terms of their cities. And during the COVID period, for instance, what we've seen is that we, as Istanbul, we've got a really nice public transportation system. However, in such a circumstance, we had problems, unfortunately. I mean, we were not able to foresee these crises, or as things that we foresaw did not materialize. So all these led to certain challenges. So in a sustainable order in macro mobility and the usage of big data, for instance, apart from that, by defining policies, for instance, when it comes to similar disasters like earthquake, COVID, we have to prepare what we have to do. And we've got baseline problem studies. For instance, during a disaster, natural disaster, you want to estimate how people will react, behave. Katrina or else Japanese earthquake, we now have data as to how people would behave when people, first of all, they would slow down a bit and then speed up a bit. Yeah.
I'm going to lean in to this conversation because I noticed that Cuneyt had his hand up, and I think it's very important that you mentioned, the role of municipalities. I'd like to hear, Cuneyt, if possible, about how you perceive, the city as a place to bring people together. What are the mechanisms from a state point of view as to how you can actually create places that people enjoy in this sort of post-pandemic world?
Teşekkür ederim.
Well, thank you. Well, the situation that we are in, we've seen that many digital tools enable us to come together and enjoying ourselves, like attending trainings, for instance. And we have really critical tools in that respect, which actually enables us to get on top of those limiting factors, conditions of pandemic, for instance. And of course, I do believe that we will be facing like disaster crises in the future as well. So when it comes to health cultures, we will, as a city, continue investing in the digital because we have to respond to changing needs really immediately, swiftly. And we can also mention that we have to define like top policies. So we're into our second year as Bursa Metropolitan Municipality. We are preparing the climate change and action plan of our city with the participation of stakeholders, huge number of stakeholders, universities, citizens, sectors, companies, they're also involved in this process. We've defined the needs of our city and we prioritize the needs of our city. And we have defined our short and long-term plans accordingly.
That's very good. Thank you, Cuneyt. I would like to now, you've mentioned briefly there culture and people. I think it would be worthwhile hearing what Yelda has to say relating to that, because it also touches on the culture pillar. We're living, Yelda, in an increasingly globalized world, and we can see that with migration, it can sometimes challenge our cultural identity, our culture. So how can we be sure that when we are going about these exercises of embracing new technologies, of trying to modernize, trying to enhance people's lives, how can we ensure that we can make the urban habitat that we're creating inclusive for all and also culturally relevant to all? Over to you, Yelda.
Jason, çok teşekkürler. Sunumun için ayrıca
Well, Jason, thank you so very much. Thank you so very much for your presentation as well. Innovative solutions and smart city versions. You talked us through in that respect. Thank you so very much. Well, just like you have mentioned in your presentation, just like Ilgun and Cuneyt has touched upon, in a holistic approach, actually, we have to create this inclusive city and we have to respond smartly to urban problems. Well, smart projects are not only to deal with smart buildings, technological devices. These kind of investments, just like Ilgun has mentioned, economically speaking, they need huge investment, of course, technology. So as to say, you need a considerable amount of budget for that. But what is important is like urban problems like climate, natural disasters, climate change. So we've got risks in many areas, many like vulnerabilities. We've got different sectors also in the city, like infrastructure, health, education, transportation, open air spaces. In all those areas, we've got ever-increasing vulnerabilities that are increasing each day. So what kind of smart responses, solutions can we develop for all these areas is the question that we have to answer. So we have to ask each part of the society what needs they have, what barriers do they face, what opportunities they have, and what threats they face. We should clearly be asking those and defining the SWOT, and then plan our projects accordingly. In our cities, we haven't been able to do this analysis, unfortunately, because always decisions were adopted from the very top and try to be rolled out from top to bottom. But now we're giving importance to like being inclusive, for instance, or else like developing governance. But we should not only consult people, receive their information and put a full stop. We have to take their ideas and also include them in the implementation phase as well. During COVID, it was more impossible for us to reach out to many other parts of the society, but we have to make them more active in the decision-making process. If we are, for instance, making a spatial plan, urban space plan, we have to consider the needs of the different parts of society. Thank you so very much, Jason.
Thank you, Yelda. And, you know, it's lovely that in your final sentence, you're talking about space. And, you know, this is where I'd really like to draw Léan Doody in. She is the Integrated Cities and Planning Leader for Europe and comes with vast expertise in the field. And I've had the privilege and pleasure of speaking with her previously. Now, Léan, I want to get back to this point on space. And just for everybody's benefit, just to make sure that we all feel comfortable. We have 10 minutes to go. And there is a beautiful question from Zainab Karamanali, if I pronounce your name right, which I'll get to in a minute. But back to space, Léan. With 2/3 of the world's population living in city centres by 2050, what are the infrastructural innovations that ensure that we can be kept mobile and not victims of our own accessibility suffocation? You know, we mention inclusivity, we mention diversity, which Yelda mentioned just now, and that means that everybody needs to benefit out of these cities, and they cannot be segregated. They need to have all the simple pleasures at their fingertips. Léan, what are those innovations that we may want to be thinking about?
What a great question. I think to take it back to basics and the space, to bring in the space point that was raised in the last by the last speaker, I think that we have to design our cities in an integrated way. So we must consider land use and mobility and equity all together. There's been a lot spoken about the 15-minute city in the last year or two. There are challenges with the 15-minute city, lots of challenges, but the point about, I think the essential point about uses and having basic uses for people within a 15-minute walk or cycle or however you want to move around in an active way is valid. And so exactly what those essential services and needs are will differ from city to city, and we have to take a culturally specific approach, and we have to realize that not every city is Paris and you know, there are many different types and typologies of city around the world. But I think the point about uses and mobility, you know, people move around for a reason, and you have to give people the ability to, if you're going to try and move towards active modes of travel, which I think a lot of cities are trying to, and they're trying to reduce reliance on the private car for reasons of congestion and air quality and energy usage, then you must consider how you're going to enable people to do that. Using, you know, active modes of travel as mentioned, but you must also consider that you need to allow people to reach the things and do the things they need to do using those active modes. So I think that's probably, you know, one of the biggest, it's not an innovation as such, but I think it's one of the biggest points that we need to consider in terms of how we you know, how we think about mobility going forward. And I think what's interesting in terms of innovation is in the last 3 to 5 years, all the micro-mobility modes that we've seen coming forward that you wouldn't have seen adult people on a scooter in the last, 3 to 5 years. Yet now you do. They were very much for children, but no longer. So I think there are a lot of interesting things that can be done with micromobility, but you have to think about land use. You have to think about green space. You have to think about connecting places and providing, nice green ways to connect people. So I think that's probably the essential point I would make.
I think that's wonderful, Léan. And, I think that the 15-minute city concept is remarkably contentious. I'm not going to sit on the fence here, guys. I'm going to say I've just been teaching in Cambridge University, and I'm still an avid walker to college. And I would not dream of taking my 5-year-old son on a 15-minute walk. He would kill me. He really would.
Scooter.
Or a scooter. So, but I would like to think, what about a 5-minute city? Why can't we go back to basics? The ability to live, work, play, and learn all within a very comfortable 400-meter walk. But that's not to say that all of these ideas have a place. And it really does, as you say, Léan, it depends on the culture, the people, the place, and ultimately, that's where we need to have this flexible mechanism to allow it to take place. I'm conscious that we've got 5 minutes left on the call, and I got a wonderful question from Zeynep Karamanli from DIT, and he said, "Thank you, Jason. What do you think the 4th generation of smart cities will embrace? What are your thoughts for the future?" And I thought, what a fantastic question to round off for all of us. What are our views of the future? And what I would like is, given that it's 5 minutes, it's a 1-minute answer from each and every one of you. So what I would like to do is just ask each and every one of you, what is the future of our smart cities going to look like? So if I could start with Cuneyt for 1 minute, please. Then I'll go to Yelda, then Elgin, then Léan, and then I'll say thank you very much. Cuneyt, over to you.
Tabii ki. Ben önümüzdeki
Yes. Well, I think that smart cities will more invest in sustainable energy, protect green areas, and protect water resources, and especially solar energy, grey water, digital payment systems, smart health, electrified public transportation. These are going to be the highlights of the future smart cities. That is what I think. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Cuneyt. Teşekkürler. Yelda.
Jason, çok kısa arada hemen.
Well, Jason, really briefly, economic environment and economic sustainability, city sustainability is really important. Data governance in that respect is really important. Making use of technology is really important. While designing the technologies to use in our smart cities, we have to be multidisciplinary. And just like you have mentioned in your presentation, we have to bring in all stakeholders, because this is a multi-dimensional thing. All stakeholders should work together, should decide on what technology to use and to design our cities in the future accordingly. Thank you so very much.
Perfectly summarized, Yelda. Perfectly summarized. Invitation coming to you for a lecture. Elgin, over to you.
Evet. Aslında Jason sen onu tamamen cevabını verdin. Yani
Well, actually, you have responded to that. It is going back to basics, actually. People in those 5 minutes doing whatever they have to do, like shopping, going to for education, for instance, dealing with their daily activities. And with long-term plans, actually, we have to concentrate on what they have to do in that micro mobility space. But long-term plans is the way out.
Thank you very much, Elgin. Perfect. Finally, Léan, over to you. What does the future of cities hold for you?
Well, I hope it holds a more integrated approach to planning, where we take all aspects of the city together, underpinned by good data collection and good data governance.
Oh my goodness, Léan, you could be a talking head for the BBC. That was perfect. And I would completely agree with all of your comments there. We're 2 minutes out. Zeynep, I hope we've answered your question. I would like to add to that and build upon what Léan mentioned just there, agile governance. I completely agree. Charles Schwab of the World Economic Forum highlighted the importance of being able to sandbox, ring fence ideas, to use certain parts of the city as a testing ground, a living laboratory, so that before we do wholesale change of infrastructural projects that may have significant costs or societal upheaval, if we can just do a controlled setting to test those ideas, and if they work under the microcosm and having the means for the state involvement to ensure that we find a regulatory model for that test, I think this is a great platform for then rolling out bigger scale infrastructure and urban developments. So that would be my contribution to the thoughts for our future cities. With that, we are 1 minute out. And that means I can now comfortably say thank you very much to Cuneyt Taskesen, I hope I pronounce your name okay, from Bursa Municipality, to Yelda Reis from UN Habitat.
Evet, çok teşekkürler.
Thank you so very much for the correct pronunciation.
And to Elgin Guskashash from Bosphorus University, and to Léan Doody, Integrated Cities and Planning Leader for Europe of Arup. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Thank you very much. I'm passing back over to you, Hakan.
Ben de Jason.
Well, Jason, thank you so very much for your presentation, for your moderation, and for all our panelists for their valuable contribution. Dear participants, thank you so very much for your attendance today. Have a good day. Thank you so very much.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.